The service corridor behind the East Reception Hall was never unlocked during visiting hours, yet the indicator light above the secured door showed green. No authorization had been logged. A small wool glove lay on the floor beside the threshold, child-sized, embroidered with a royal crest. The royal guard on post paused, hand resting near the access panel. The air felt undisturbed. The silence felt deliberate. The royal guard pressed his identification card against the concealed reader a second time, not to unlock it, he had already overridden the access, but to confirm the system registered his presence. The soft mechanical click behind the secured door sounded too loud in the narrow service corridor. The green indicator light above the frame remained steady, an anomaly in itself during visiting hours. This section of the East Wing housed archival records and structural schematics. It was not a place for tours, private or otherwise. He stepped inside, allowing the door to close behind him, sealing the corridor in controlled silence. The temperature shifted immediately, cooler, drier. The air carried the faint scent of old paper and conditioned ventilation. Overhead lights were set to low conservation levels, casting long, disciplined shadows along the shelving units. 10 meters ahead, near the second junction, he saw her. The young royal stood very still, facing a glass-fronted cabinet as if studying its contents. She wore formal afternoon attire, appropriate for public engagements, though no engagement was scheduled in this wing. One small hand was bare. The other glove, the one he had seen outside, was missing. She did not appear frightened. That concerned him more. Children who wandered into restricted spaces alone were usually anxious, disoriented, aware they had done something they were not meant to do. She simply stood there, composed in the quiet. He approached at a measured pace, boots striking the polished stone with deliberate softness. "Your Highness," he said evenly, stopping at a respectful distance. She turned, recognition settling in her expression. "You are not assigned to this corridor today," she replied, as if clarifying a schedule error. He noted the phrasing, not "I'm lost," not "I followed someone," assigned, the language of instruction. He scanned the passage beyond her, no secondary movement, no shadow displacement, no audible retreat. The camera dome above the junction was dark. That confirmed the system alert. 4 minutes of interrupted feed. 4 minutes was a precise window, long enough to escort someone in, short enough to avoid broad detection. He activated his shoulder radio. "Control, this is East Detail 3. Confirm status of archival corridor access at 1432. Static answered first, thin and stretched. Then a voice, slightly delayed. "East Detail 3, we are reviewing. Stand by." Reviewing was not confirmation. He kept his posture neutral and stepped closer to the child, lowering himself slightly so his eyeline did not tower. "Who escorted you here, ma'am?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, not in confusion, but in recollection. "I was told it was permitted today." The statement was careful. He did not ask by whom, not yet. The silence behind them felt organized, not accidental. He became aware of the ventilation cycle beginning again, a low mechanical breath returning to baseline. Someone had calculated this. He removed his outer glove and extended his hand without urgency. "We will return to the private wing now." It was not a question. She placed her ungloved hand into his, fingers cool from the conditioned air. As they moved back toward the secured door, he performed a secondary scan of the corridor walls, noting a faint smudge near the auxiliary keypad. Recent contact, likely within the same 4-minute window. No forced entry, no damaged seal. The system had been persuaded, not broken. Control responded again, this time more composed. East Detail 3, corridor access shows authorized override, administrative clearance code. The phrasing tightened something behind his ribs. Administrative clearance did not apply to this wing without dual confirmation from council security. Identify issuing authority, he said. A longer pause followed. Stand by. He did not break stride. When the door reopened at his card, the hallway outside seemed brighter than before, populated at its far end by two junior attendants who quickly looked away when they saw him emerge with the child. Their posture suggested they had been waiting, not searching. He registered their presence but did not engage. The missing glove lay exactly where it had fallen. He retrieved it and slipped it gently over her hand before guiding her forward. The palace sounds resumed as they moved deeper into authorized space. Distant footsteps, muted voices behind thick doors, the regulated rhythm of routine. Yet the absence of alarm was itself instructive. No containment protocol had been initiated, no lockdown tone. Whoever authorized the access had anticipated minimal resistance. His radio clicked again. East Detail 3, override issued by Senior Administrative Office, clearance level verified. The title was provided without a name, as if that omission reduced weight. He felt the calculation in it. A senior administrative official did not escort children personally. They delegated, they scheduled, they documented. There was no documentation. He slowed near an intersection and turned slightly, placing himself between the child and an approaching staff member who seemed to reconsider crossing their path. "You were told it was permitted today," he said quietly to her, keeping his gaze forward. She nodded once. It was arranged. Arranged suggested preparation. The precision of the camera interruption suggested coordination. He stopped briefly at a security terminal and logged a provisional note, minor in restricted corridor, administrative override, feed interruption 4 minutes. He did not elaborate. Not yet. Protocol required containment first, questions later. But instinct had already moved ahead of procedure. Someone with authority had created a window where oversight would not look too closely. As they approached the private wing entrance, a senior attendant appeared, composed but pale. "We were informed the princess was with staff," the attendant said carefully. He held her gaze just long enough to measure whether she believed her own statement. "She was unescorted," he replied. "No accusation, just fact." He transferred custody formally, waiting until the internal doors sealed and biometric confirmation registered the child's safe return. Only then did he step back into the corridor. The palace sounds resumed around him, unchanged, but he remained still for a moment longer, reviewing the sequence in precise order. Green light, missing log, 4-minute blind spot, administrative clearance. It was not a wandering incident. It was structured, and someone expected it to pass unnoticed. The security operations room was kept deliberately dim to preserve screen clarity, rows of monitors casting a controlled blue light across polished desks and uniformed shoulders. The Royal Guard entered without announcement, his presence acknowledged only by a slight straightening among the technical staff. He removed his cap and placed it on the console beside him, eyes already fixed on the playback timeline of the archival corridor. The 4-minute interruption appeared as a clean absence, no static distortion, no signal degradation, just a seamless gap where footage should have been. It was professionally executed. "Run the system log from 1428 to 1436, he said. The technician complied, fingers moving with restrained precision. Lines of authorization data scrolled down the screen. At 1431, an administrative override appeared, clearance tier high enough to bypass standard dual confirmation protocols. The issuing office designation was visible. The specific user identification was masked behind executive privilege coding. That level of masking was rare inside internal palace security. "Who has active credentials under that office at this hour?" he asked. A brief hesitation. 3 senior officials, 2 are in council session, 1 is listed as mobile. Mobile meant unpinned to a fixed terminal. It allowed remote authorization through encrypted device. The guard absorbed this without visible reaction. Any record of a scheduled educational tour? Another check, another silence. Negative. The air in the room felt cooler than the corridor had. Procedure dictated he log the anomaly and forward it to supervisory review. It did not require personal follow-up. Yet he remained, watching as the technician attempted to reconstruct peripheral camera feeds from adjacent corridors. At 14:32, one external camera briefly adjusted focus as if responding to motion outside its frame. No figure entered the visible angle. The timing aligned too precisely to dismiss. A soft shift behind him signaled someone entering the operations room. He did not turn immediately. He recognized the measured cadence of leather shoes on composite flooring. The senior administrative secretary stood near the threshold, hands clasped loosely behind his back, posture controlled. "I understand there has been some confusion regarding corridor access," the official said, tone even, almost courteous. The guard faced him then. "A minor was found unescorted in a restricted zone," he replied. The wording was deliberate. The secretary inclined his head slightly. The visit was arranged as a brief archival exposure for educational purposes, an oversight in logging, regrettably. The explanation arrived too smoothly, as though prepared in transit. "No record exists," the guard said. "The camera feed was interrupted." A faint pause. "Temporary maintenance adjustment," the secretary answered. "Authorized." The guard noted the absence of detail, no maintenance ticket reference, no technician name. The room had gone quieter, staff focused on screens that no longer require such intensity. The guard understood the pressure forming, subtle but present. Accept the administrative clarification, categorize it as procedural miscommunication, and close the report at departmental level. Escalation would imply misconduct at a tier rarely questioned. He shifted his attention back to the monitor, enlarging the authorization entry until it filled the screen. "Maintenance adjustments are documented through facilities control," he said calmly. "This code originated from executive clearance." The secretary's expression did not harden, but it narrowed, an almost imperceptible recalibration. "You are thorough," the official replied. "That is commendable." It was neither praise nor rebuke. It was assessment. The guard remained silent, allowing the data to speak. 4 minutes, single override, masked user ID, no dual authentication. "Who accompanied the child?" he asked. "A member of my staff initiated the access," the secretary answered after a fractional delay. "Name?" The question rested in the space between them longer than protocol usually allowed. "That will not be necessary," the secretary said quietly. "The responsibility rests with my office." That statement shifted the weight again, from individual accountability to institutional shielding. The guard recognized the maneuver. By centralizing responsibility, the official prevented scrutiny of any one subordinate. It also insulated himself. The minor stated she was told it was permitted. By whom? The secretary's gaze flicked briefly toward the technicians, then back. By someone authorized to do so. The guard registered the controlled vagueness. Authority was being used as both explanation and barrier. Surveillance interruption requires council-level acknowledgement. Was council notified? A subtle tightening at the edge of the secretary's jaw suggested the first sign of friction. "This is an internal matter," the secretary replied. "There was no threat." The guard considered the phrasing carefully. No threat. The absence of visible harm did not negate vulnerability. A secured corridor existed precisely because potential risks were anticipated, not because incidents were common. He folded his gloves slowly, an action measured enough to signal neither defiance nor compliance. The record will reflect that a minor was present without escort in a restricted area during an undocumented surveillance lapse. The secretary studied him in silence. "You understand the implications of formalizing that language," the official replied. It was not a warning, it was acknowledgement of consequence. Escalation would trigger inquiry beyond departmental discretion, council review, perhaps even advisory oversight from the royal household itself. Careers could narrow, influence could shift. The guard met his gaze without hostility. "My function is to record conditions as they occur," he said evenly. The room felt smaller now, the hum of equipment more pronounced. After a moment, the secretary inclined his head once, a gesture that conceded nothing yet prevented open confrontation. "Very well," he said. "Submit your preliminary findings." He turned and exited with the same measured steps. The technicians resumed normal breathing patterns only after the door closed. The guard saved the log extract to a secure file and attached the time-stamped anomaly markers. Pressure had been applied gently, professionally. It would intensify if he advanced the report beyond preliminary status. He understood that clearly, but the sequence remained unchanged in his mind. Structured access, masked authorization, controlled silence. This was no clerical oversight. It was deliberate. The private wing carried a different quality of silence, less mechanical, more insulated. Thick carpets absorbed footfall, and the lighting shifted from institutional white to warmer tones designed for domestic calm. The royal guard stood just outside the inner threshold after formally transferring custody, reviewing the sequence again before proceeding further. Protocol required minimal engagement with the child beyond immediate safety, yet unanswered variables remained. He requested permission from the senior attendant to clarify a few details. The attendant hesitated only briefly before nodding and guiding him to a smaller sitting room adjacent to the main corridor. The young royal sat upright on a narrow upholstered bench, her composure intact, hands folded neatly now that both gloves were restored. A porcelain clock ticked softly on the mantel. He remained standing to avoid altering the tone of the exchange. "You were told the visit was permitted today," he began evenly. She nodded once. "It was arranged after lessons." The phrasing again suggested structure. "Who informed you?" he asked. She lowered her gaze slightly, not in fear, but in thought. "A gentleman from the administrative office. He said it would be brief." No name offered. He did not press her to supply one. Children within the palace were accustomed to interacting with titled officials whose roles blended into formality. "Did anyone else accompany you inside the corridor?" A pause. He opened the door, then he stepped away to take a call. The guard registered the detail carefully. Stepped away. That would explain the 4-minute window. "Did he instruct you to remain inside?" She considered. "He said I should look at the maps, that he would return." The archival corridor housed historical boundary maps and structural diagrams, visually interesting but hardly tailored to a child's education. "How long were you alone?" he asked. She glanced toward the clock instinctively, as though measuring by memory of sound. Not long. Her definition of duration was unreliable, but the system log was not. 4 minutes. Enough for isolation, not enough for prolonged exposure. "Did anyone else enter?" He kept his tone neutral, avoiding leading emphasis. She shook her head. "I heard the door close." The statement aligned with the sealed environment. No secondary access recorded beyond the single override. He felt a subtle tightening in his chest, not relief, not yet, but confirmation that the event had boundaries. The vulnerability lay not in what occurred inside the corridor, but in the fact that it could occur at all. "You did nothing improper," he said quietly, careful not to frame her as responsible. "You followed instruction." She looked up at him then, searching perhaps for disapproval. Finding none, she returned her gaze to her folded hands. The senior attendant re-entered, signaling that the exchange had reached its acceptable limit. He inclined his head slightly and withdrew. As he stepped back into the outer corridor, the warmth of the private wing receded behind him, replaced by the cooler neutrality of operational space. The facts were clearer now. Deliberate escort, temporary withdrawal, child instructed to remain, surveillance gap synchronized. The absence of overt harm did not diminish the breach, it sharpened it. He proceeded directly to technical services rather than returning to his post. The maintenance supervisor, a methodical woman with decades of tenure, retrieved facility logs upon his request. No maintenance was scheduled for archival corridor cameras, she confirmed after cross-checking the timestamp, and no emergency adjustment recorded. That eliminated the administrative explanation entirely. The surveillance interruption required either direct executive override or manual physical interference at the junction panel, yet no physical tampering had been observed. Could the feed be paused remotely, he asked. She nodded once, with sufficient clearance. He absorbed that quietly. Clearance at that level implied trust embedded deep within palace governance. It was not granted casually. Back in the security room, he requested the encrypted device activity log associated with the administrative office's mobile credentials. The technician hesitated longer this time. Accessing that log requires secondary authorization. He understood. Requesting it would formalize suspicion. "Submit the request," he said. While awaiting approval, he reviewed adjacent corridor footage frame by frame. At 14:31, just before the archival feed cut, a figure passed briefly across a distant reflection in polished stone, a distortion more than an image. Height consistent with an adult male, suit jacket, dark tone. The figure did not linger in range. It was enough to confirm presence without revealing identity. His radio vibrated softly. Approval granted for limited device metadata review. The technician extracted connection points. One encrypted tablet registered to the senior administrative office initiated a secure handshake with the corridor system at 14:31 and disconnected at 14:35. 4 minutes. Exact. Was the device physically present in the corridor? The signal triangulation suggests proximity within 20 meters. That placed it either inside the archival space or immediately outside the secured threshold. The guard's mind arranged the sequence precisely. Escort child, unlock door, instruct her to observe maps, step aside under pretense of a call, initiate remote feed interruption, re-establish system before returning. The purpose remained unclear. If the intent were educational, surveillance would not need disabling. If the intent were concealment, the window was calculated to avoid detection, but short enough to minimize audit flags. He felt the weight of decision pressing closer now. Filing a routine report would satisfy surface protocol. Requesting a formal inquiry would challenge a senior office with direct access to counsel. He removed a small notepad from his inner pocket and wrote the timeline in clean, restrained script. Facts only, no interpretation. The palace functioned on hierarchy, and hierarchy depended on discretion, but discretion could not extend into silent vulnerability. The corridor had been without witnesses. That condition alone required escalation. He closed the notebook and looked once more at the blank 4-minute gap on the monitor. It was too clean, too intentional, and it would not remain buried unless someone chose to let it. The formal incident report template required restraint by design: time, location, personnel, deviation from standard procedure. No space existed for intuition. The Royal Guard sat at a narrow desk within the internal security office, the door closed but not locked, and began entering the sequence exactly as it had occurred. 1431, administrative override initiated. 1432 to 36, surveillance interruption. Minor located unescorted in restricted archival corridor. Escort returned minor to private wing. He avoided adjectives. He avoided implication. Each sentence was constructed to withstand review from individuals trained to detect overreach. Outside the office window, late afternoon light flattened against the stone courtyard, pale and indifferent. When he attached the extracted device metadata and maintenance confirmation logs, he paused only briefly before selecting the escalation designation. Council-level security review recommended. The system prompted him once, confirmation required for high-tier referral. He confirmed. Within 12 minutes, his direct supervisor requested his presence. The supervisor's office was orderly, almost austere. "You understand this will trigger inquiry beyond our department," the supervisor said, not unkindly. "Yes, sir." The supervisor studied the attached documentation in silence. There was no reported harm. The statement was factual. It was also incomplete. There was unsupervised exposure in a controlled zone during a masked authorization, the guard replied evenly. He kept his tone neutral, refusing the language of accusation. The supervisor leaned back slightly. "The senior administrative office has already indicated the visit was educational. No record exists of that designation," the guard answered. The room settled into a quiet that was not hostile, but waited. "Pressure may follow," the supervisor said finally. It was not a threat, it was preparation. "Understood." The supervisor signed the referral authorization. The decision moved upward from there. By early evening, notification reached the Palace Advisory Council that a minor had been present in a restricted corridor during an undocumented surveillance lapse authorized through executive credentials. The phrasing was clinical, the implications were not. He returned to post without ceremony. Guards rotated, courtiers passed. The routine of palace life remained undisturbed on the surface. Yet subtle shifts emerged. 2 additional officers reassigned to private wing perimeter, temporary suspension of non-essential administrative overrides, technical audit initiated quietly across secure sectors. No public acknowledgement accompanied these changes. That was intentional. Stability required discretion. Still, the guard felt the narrowing corridor of scrutiny forming around him. He had not accused anyone directly. He had simply refused to compress the event into harmless language. The inquiry convened within 48 hours in a closed chamber adjacent to council offices. He was called to present the sequence verbally. The senior administrative secretary sat across the table, composed as before, flanked by legal counsel. The atmosphere was controlled, almost academic. He recited the timeline without embellishment, referring to logs when necessary, avoiding speculation. When asked whether he believed the child had been endangered, he responded carefully. The absence of supervision in a restricted area constitutes vulnerability regardless of outcome. The phrasing drew neither agreement nor objection, but it settled into the record. The secretary maintained that the educational visit had been improvised to accommodate scheduling constraints and that surveillance interruption was enacted to prevent unauthorized distribution of archival materials during the demonstration. The explanation sounded plausible in isolation, less so against the absence of documentation. Council members requested confirmation from facilities and technical services. Both reiterated there had been no maintenance request and no archival clearance logged. The inquiry did not become dramatic, it became precise. That precision worked against ambiguity. By the session's conclusion, Council determined that executive credentials had been used outside established protocol, without secondary authorization, and without child safeguard notification. The action was categorized as unauthorized procedural bypass. The official received formal censure and temporary suspension of clearance privileges pending further review. The language remained restrained, but the consequence was unmistakable. In the weeks that followed, new directives were issued quietly. Dual authentication mandatory for any zone housing minors. Automatic alarm if surveillance feeds are interrupted for more than 60 seconds. Documented escort requirement for all educational exposures. The guard read the updates without reaction. They were practical corrections, not commendations. No one thanked him directly. No ceremony acknowledged the escalation. That, too, was appropriate. His function had not been to win confrontation, but to preserve structure where it had thinned. One afternoon, while resuming standard corridor patrol, he passed the same secured archival door. The indicator light glowed red, steady, and controlled. Access required two separate confirmations now. He paused only briefly, listening to the measured quiet of the hallway. The palace continued its rhythm, ceremonial, disciplined, outwardly serene. Within that order, a small vulnerability had been reinforced. The young royal would never know the administrative mechanics behind that reinforcement. She would only know that when doors opened in the future, they did so under watchful presence. He adjusted his gloves and resumed his post, posture unchanged. Influence pressed against procedure and found resistance not through defiance, but through record. In a structure built on hierarchy, protection depended not on rank, but on adherence.